The Pacific Ocean churned restlessly against the rocky cliffs of Monterey, California, its waves a restless murmur under the late June sky of 2018. I gripped the wheel of my Tesla, the coastal highway stretching before me like a ribbon unspooling into uncertainty. The salty breeze slipped through the open window, tangling my hair, but it did little to ease the knot in my chest. At 34, Abigail Larson, had built a tech startup from a cramped San Francisco apartment into a $50 million enterprise. My name splashed across tech blogs and Forbes lists. Yet, as I drove toward my family's annual reunion at our beachfront estate, I felt like the same uncertain girl who'd spent her life chasing a shadow of approval that always slipped through my fingers. This year, I'd made a reckless decision. One born from a desperate hope to finally bridge the chasm between me and my father, Edward Larson. I'd purchased a vintage sailboat, a 1960s schooner, its wooden hull polished to a mirror sheen, its sails crisp against the horizon. It was the kind of boat my father had admired during a rare childhood sailing trip when I was 10, one of the few times I'd seen him smile at me without reservation. The memory was a fragile thing, like sea glass worn smooth by time, but it had driven me to spend a fortune on this gift, hoping it would be the key to unlocking his pride. The schooner was docked at the marina near our estate, waiting to be revealed as a surprise for his 60th birthday, which coincided with the reunion. But in my leather satchel, nestled beneath my laptop, was something far heavier. A letter I'd found in my mother's attic 3 months earlier, its elegant script hinting at a secret that could unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. The coastal road curved, revealing the Larson estate in the distance, a sprawling Mediterranean villa with white stucco walls and terracotta tiles, perched like a sentinel above the ocean. It was a monument to my father's success as a venture capitalist, a man who'd turned a modest inheritance into a tech empire that dominated Silicon Valley. The reunion was never just a family gathering, it was a performance, a stage for Edward to showcase his legacy to relatives and his carefully curated circle of tech moguls. As I approached, the driveway was already crowded with luxury cars, BMWs, Audis, a garish red Lamborghini that screamed new money. I parked, my hands lingering on the wheel, and took a deep breath. The brass key to the sailboat, its anchor-shaped fob glinting in the sunlight, sat in my satchel next to the letter. I hadn't opened it yet, afraid of what it might confirm, but its presence was a constant pressure, like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. I smoothed my linen blazer, chosen to project success without ostentation, and stepped out into the warm California air. The estate loomed before me, its arched windows reflecting the ocean like liquid mirrors. Inside, the grand foyer buzzed with voices, relatives exchanging air kisses. My father's business associates swirling glasses of Pinot Noir, their laughter polished and performative. My mother, Lillian, appeared almost instantly, her jasmine perfume enveloping me as she pulled me into a warm embrace. "Abigail, you look radiant," she whispered, her smile genuine but tinged with the nervous edge she always wore in my father's presence. Her eyes flicked toward the patio, where he was holding court, a silent warning that the evening would demand careful navigation. The foyer was a kaleidoscope of familiar faces, aunts and uncles, cousins I saw once a year, and the inevitable tech titans my father invited to blur the line between family and business. I spotted my older brother, Nathan, near the bar, his tailored suit and easy charisma drawing a small crowd as he recounted his latest venture capital triumph. At 38, he was the golden child, the heir to my father's empire, his Stanford degree, a badge he wore as proudly as our father did. My younger sister, Claire, floated through the room, her laughter a bright counterpoint to the room's calculated energy. At 31, she was a pediatric nurse, her warmth a balm that softened even the most pretentious guests. She caught my eye and waved, her smile promising a moment of refuge later. I mingled, exchanging pleasantries with Aunt Margaret, who asked about my love life with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, and Uncle Tom, who clapped me on the shoulder and called me our tech wizard, a nickname that would irritate my father if he overheard. My father's voice carried from the patio, where he was demonstrating a new drone his firm had invested in, its sleek design buzzing above the lawn. His silver hair caught the sunlight, and his gestures were expansive, commanding attention from his audience of tech moguls. When his gaze met mine, it was fleeting, a curt nod, as if I were just another guest, not his daughter who'd flown in from San Francisco to honor his birthday. The sting was familiar, a dull ache I'd carried since childhood, but it cut deeper today, with the sailboat waiting and the letter's secret pressing against me. Claire found me near the fireplace, her eyes bright with excitement. "Abby, I read about your startup's funding round in TechCrunch. 20 million. Why haven't you told Dad? He'd love to hear about it." Her optimism was infectious, but I knew better. My father had dismissed my tech career as playing with apps, unlike Nathan's serious investments in biotech and real estate. Still, I forced a smile, promising to try, clinging to the hope that the sailboat might change his perspective. "You're too hard on yourself," Claire said, squeezing my arm. "He's proud, even if he doesn't show it." I wanted to believe her, but the letter in my satchel whispered otherwise, its unopened contents a question I wasn't ready to answer. As the afternoon unfolded, I watched my father from a distance, his pride unmistakable as he showed off the drone to his associates. He described its AI capabilities with the same enthusiasm he reserved for Nathan's deals or Claire's charity work. I wondered, not for the first time, why my achievements, my company's patents, my TED Talk, my Forbes 30 under 30 listing never registered on his radar. I'd built something tangible, something that changed lives. Yet to him, it was as if I were still the girl who'd brought home a B+ and been told it should have been an A. The moment for my gift approached as the guests gathered for cocktails on the cliffside terrace, the ocean stretching endlessly below. My heart pounded as I approached my father, the brass key heavy in my hand. "Dad, I have something for you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's for your birthday. It's at the marina." His eyebrows rose, a rare crack in his composed facade, and he followed me to the terrace, where the schooner bobbed gently in the water, its sails furled against the golden sunset. For a fleeting moment, his face lit up, and I thought I'd done it. I'd finally broken through. "Abigail, this is extravagant," he said, his tone a mix of surprise and something I couldn't place. Perhaps suspicion. He turned the key over in his hand, then added, "But why the theatrics? You could have just written a check." The words landed like a slap, sharp and dismissive. I forced a smile, explaining how I'd remembered our sailing trip from when I was 10, the only time I'd seen him truly happy with me. He nodded absently, already turning to show the boat to his associates, as if my gesture was just another asset to leverage for his reputation. "Nice touch, Abigail," he said over his shoulder, "but you know I prefer investments with better returns." I stood frozen, watching him pose for photos with the boat, claiming it as his own triumph, while Claire appeared at my side, squeezing my hand. "It's beautiful, Abby. Don't let him ruin it." But the damage was done. The sailboat, like every other effort I'd made, was just another failure in his eyes. That night, in the quiet of my old bedroom, I called my best friend, Maya, my voice thick with unshed tears. I should have known, I said, staring at the ceiling's familiar cracks. I spent a fortune on that boat, and he barely acknowledged it. Maya's response was fierce, her voice crackling through the phone. Take it back, Abby. He doesn't deserve it. And whatever's in that letter, don't open it in front of him. It's not worth the fallout. I promised her I'd keep the letter sealed. But its presence in my satchel felt like a grenade, its pin loose and ready to slip. The reunion dinner loomed tomorrow, and with it, the inevitable performance of family unity. A performance I was no longer sure I could endure. The morning of the Larson family reunion dawned with a clarity that felt almost mocking. The Monterey sun painting the ocean in shades of sapphire and gold. I stood on the balcony of my old bedroom, the salt air sharp against my skin, and watched the waves crash against the cliffs below. The sailboat I'd given my father bobbed at the marina, a silent testament to my foolish hope that it could bridge the distance between us. His dismissive words from yesterday. Why the theatrics? You could have just written a check echoed in my mind, each syllable a reminder of the approval I'd never earn. In my satchel, the unopened letter from my mother's attic pressed against my laptop, its weight a constant reminder of the secret I wasn't ready to face. Today was the main event. The dinner where our family's carefully curated facade would be on full display, and I felt like an actor dreading her cue. I dressed with precision, choosing a tailored cream dress that balanced professionalism with the effortless elegance my father seemed to expect from women in his world. The mirror reflected a version of me I'd crafted for boardrooms confident, polished, untouchable, but inside, I was still the girl who'd spent decades trying to decipher his impossible standards. Downstairs, the estate was already alive with activity. Caterers bustled through the kitchen, arranging trays of canapes, while my mother's voice floated from the dining room, directing the placement of her prized orchid centerpieces. She caught my eye as I descended the stairs, her smile warm but fleeting, her hands twisting nervously in the folds of her silk scarf. Everything's ready, Abigail, she said, her tone a practiced blend of hostess cheer and maternal concern. Your father's on the patio with the investors. He's in high spirits today. Her words were a warning, not a reassurance. My father's high spirits often meant a performance for his guests, a chance to showcase his legacy while subtly reminding me of my place outside it. I nodded, forcing a smile, and stepped into the grand foyer, where relatives and my father's Silicon Valley associates mingled like players in a well-rehearsed play. The air hummed with laughter and the clink of glasses, but beneath it was the undercurrent of expectation, the unspoken rules of the Larson family theater. I spotted my brother, Nathan, near the bar, his charisma drawing a crowd as he recounted a recent deal that had landed his firm a biotech startup worth millions. His gestures were expansive, his laughter easy, and I envied the way he navigated our father's world without effort, as if born with a map I'd never been given. Claire appeared at my side, a glass of sparkling water in hand, her eyes bright with her usual warmth. Abby, you look like you're about to pitch to a room full of sharks, she teased, nudging me gently. Relax. It's just family. Her optimism was a lifeline, but it couldn't erase the memory of my father's dismissal yesterday. I wanted to tell her about the letter, to confess the secret that was eating away at me, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I let her pull me into a conversation with our cousin Rachel, who was gushing about her new interior design business in San Diego. You should come see my studio, Abby, Rachel said, her enthusiasm genuine. Your tech aesthetic would inspire me. I smiled, grateful for the distraction, but my eyes kept drifting to the patio, where my father's voice carried over the crowd, his pride unmistakable as he demonstrated the drone he'd shown off yesterday. The drone buzzed above the lawn, its sleek design a symbol of his latest investment triumph. He described its AI capabilities with the same fervor he reserved for Nathan's deals or Claire's charity work, his silver hair catching the sunlight as he gestured to his audience of tech moguls. I watched from the edge of the terrace, my fingers brushing the outline of the letter in my satchel. Why was it so easy for him to celebrate machines and money, but so impossible to acknowledge me? I'd built a startup that was changing lives, with patents that had disrupted the tech industry. Yet to him, I was still the daughter who'd chosen the wrong path, who dared to forge her own way instead of following his. Claire sensed my mood and pulled me aside, her expression softening. "Abby, I know he was harsh about the boat yesterday, but you should tell him about your latest funding round. It's huge. He'd be impressed if you gave him a chance." Her faith in our father's capacity for change was unwavering. But I knew better. I'd tried countless times high school valedictorian, Cornell scholarship, my first patent only to be met with critiques about how I could have done better, chosen differently. Still, I nodded, clinging to the faint hope that tonight, in front of the family, he might see me differently. "I'll try," I promised. But the letter's weight reminded me that the truth might demand more than a hopeful gesture. As the afternoon wore on, the reunion's rhythm settled into its familiar pattern. Aunts and uncles swapped stories about their children's Ivy League acceptances, while my father's business associates debated cryptocurrency trends. I played my part, answering questions about my startup with practiced ease, deflecting inquiries about my personal life with a smile. But every interaction felt like a performance, a mask I wore to hide the growing unease inside me. The letter was a ticking bomb, its contents a mystery I both craved and feared. I'd found it while helping my mother sort through old boxes in the attic, a task she'd assigned during a rare visit home. The envelope, addressed to a Daniel Harper in her elegant script, had been tucked inside a photo album, its edges worn but unopened. I hadn't read it, but the few lines visible through the translucent paper hinted at a love affair, a pregnancy, and a choice that had shaped my life before I was born. I retreated to the library for a moment of quiet, the room's dark wood shelves a refuge from the chaos outside. My mother's art books lined the walls, a reminder of her life as a curator before she'd become the perfect Larson matriarch. I pulled the letter from my satchel, turning it over in my hands. The temptation to open it was overwhelming, but fear held me back. What if it confirmed what I'd begun to suspect after a genealogy app flagged inconsistencies in my DNA? What if I wasn't a Larson at all? The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating, a possible explanation for the distance my father had always kept between us. A knock at the door startled me. Claire poked her head in, her expression a mix of concern and mischief. "Hiding already? Come on. Abby, you can't miss the appetizers. The scallops are divine." I slipped the letter back into my satchel and followed her, forcing a laugh. "Just needed a breather," I said. But her knowing look told me she wasn't fooled. As we rejoined the crowd, I caught my father's eye across the room. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something regret. Perhaps. But it vanished as he turned to greet another guest, his nod as perfunctory as ever. The sting was sharp, but I pushed it down, determined to make it through the evening without crumbling. The terrace was crowded now, the guests sipping cocktails as the sun dipped toward the horizon. My father had moved on from the drone to a new topic, his latest real estate venture in Silicon Valley, a project Nathan was spearheading. Nathan stood at his side, basking in the attention, his wife, Emily, and their 2 children nearby, the perfect picture of the Larson legacy. I watched from the sidelines, nursing a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, my satchel heavy at my side. Claire joined me, her presence a quiet anchor. "He's showing off again," she murmured, nodding toward our father. "But you should see the way people talk about your startup when he's not around. You're making waves, Abby." Her words were a balm, but they couldn't erase the memory of my father's dismissal. I wanted to believe the sailboat had been a mistake, a miscalculation, but a part of me still hoped he'd acknowledge it tonight. In front of everyone, I'd planned to mention it during dinner, to frame it as a tribute to our shared memory. But the letter's presence made every plan feel fragile. What if it revealed a truth that would shatter the family's carefully constructed harmony? What if my father's coldness wasn't just disappointment, but something deeper, something tied to the secret my mother had buried? As the dinner bell chimed, signaling the move to the dining room, I steeled myself for the performance ahead. The letter remained in my satchel, its contents a shadow over the evening. But I wasn't ready to confront it, not yet. I followed the crowd inside, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. Tonight, I would play my role in the Larson family theater, but the weight of the secret I carried told me this might be the last time I did so on their terms. The dining room of the Larson estate glowed under the chandelier's soft light, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Pacific Ocean as it churned in the twilight. The mahogany table, set for 20, gleamed with crystal and silver. Each place card in my mother's meticulous calligraphy, a silent marker of the family hierarchy. I found my seat near the end, wedged between Cousin Rachel's husband, Mark, a quiet accountant I'd met only once, and one of my father's younger investors, a tech bro named Ethan who kept checking his phone. Nathan and his family occupied the prime spots near my father at the head of the table, with Claire and her husband, David, serving as buffers between the inner circle and the lesser relatives. My mother sat at the far end, her position a perfect metaphor for her role, technically equal but distant, her nervous smile catching my eye as I settled in. The weight of the unopened letter in my satchel, tucked beneath my chair, was a constant pressure, like a stone in my shoe. I hadn't slept well, my dreams haunted by fragments of my mother's script. The words Daniel Harper and pregnancy looping through my mind. The sailboat I'd gifted my father yesterday, meant to bridge the chasm between us, had only widened it. His dismissive, "Why the theatrics?" echoing like a verdict. Tonight, I'd planned to mention the boat again during dinner, to frame it as a tribute to our shared memory from when I was 10. But the letter's presence made every plan feel precarious, like walking a tightrope over a storm-tossed sea. The first course arrived seared scallops with microgreens, placed with military precision by the waitstaff. My father stood, wineglass in hand, commanding silence without a word. His presence filled the room, his silver hair catching the chandelier's light as he began his annual toast. "To the Larson family," he declared, his voice resonant with the authority of a man accustomed to boardrooms and power plays. A legacy built on vision, discipline, and success. He praised Nathan's latest biotech acquisition, describing it as a game changer for Silicon Valley, and lauded Claire's work with a local children's charity, calling her the heart of our community. His words were polished, performative, and I braced myself for the familiar omission, the silence where my name should be. Instead, his gaze landed on me, sharp and deliberate, like a predator spotting prey. "And Abigail," he said, pausing for effect, his smile a blade glinting in the light, always chasing her little tech dreams. "Isn't she? I'm proud of my children, well, most of them. Some think success is about headlines and flashy apps, not the substance of real investments." The words landed with surgical precision, slicing through the room's polite hum. A few guests chuckled nervously, assuming it was a jest, but my mother's face paled, her knuckles whitening around her napkin. Claire's eyes widened in horror, and Nathan's lips curved into a smug half-smile, as if my humiliation was a victory for him. The familiar burn of shame rose in my chest, but this time, it was laced with something new, a cold, resolute anger. For years, I'd endured his public critiques, each one framed as paternal concern but designed to diminish my startup's $50 million valuation, my patents, my Forbes listing. None of it mattered in his world, where success was measured by conformity to his vision. The letter in my satchel pulsed with potential, its contents a key to understanding why I'd always been the outsider. I'd taken a DNA test months ago, prompted by a genealogy app, and the results had shown no genetic link to Edward Larson. The letter, found in my mother's attic, seemed to confirm a truth I'd only begun to suspect. I wasn't his daughter. I forced myself to stay composed, sipping my water with a steady hand, my boardroom training kicking in. Ethan, the investor beside me, leaned over, oblivious to the tension. "Hey, Abigail, I read about your startup in TechCrunch. That AI patent is killer. Why's your dad so hard on you?" His bluntness caught me off guard, and I managed a tight smile. "He has high standards," I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. Across the table, Claire shot me a sympathetic look, but my father had already moved on, steering the conversation to real estate trends, his voice drowning out any chance for me to respond. As the second course roasted beet salad arrived, I caught my mother trying to interject. "Abigail's company just secured a major funding round," she said, her voice soft but firm. My father's smile didn't falter, but his eyes flicked to her. "A warning. Speaking of markets," he said smoothly. "Ethan, what's your take on the blockchain bubble?" The pivot was seamless, erasing my mother's effort as if it hadn't happened. I felt the familiar sting, but it was sharper tonight, amplified by the sailboat's failure and the letter's looming truth. The meal progressed through its elaborate courses, each dish a testament to my mother's meticulous planning. My father directed the conversation with subtle cues, ensuring it stayed within his preferred domains: tech investments, local politics, Nathan's past lacrosse glories. When he turned to me, his questions were barbed, designed to undermine. "Abigail, your firm's focused on domestic markets, right? Limiting, isn't it? Given global opportunities," he asked, swirling his wine. I corrected him calmly, my voice steady despite the heat in my cheeks. "Actually, our AI model's been adopted internationally, with 35% growth in Europe last quarter." He waved a hand dismissively. "Numbers on paper. We'll see how that holds up in a downturn." I maintained my composure, but each exchange was a blow, his words carefully crafted to reframe my successes as fleeting or derivative. Claire reached across the table during a lull, squeezing my hand under the napkin. "Your model's revolutionary. Abby," she whispered. "David's cousin works in tech, and he says it's game-changing." Her validation warmed me, but it couldn't erase the pathetic need I still felt for my father's approval, a need that had driven me to spend a fortune on that sailboat. As the main course roasted lamb with rosemary arrived, I overheard my father in the adjoining study, the door slightly ajar. "The boat, quite a statement," he was saying to one of his associates, his tone smug. "Abigail's always been desperate for attention, but her success, that's the Larson work ethic. The opportunities I gave her, the casual erasure of my achievements, the rewriting of my hard-won independence as his doing, sent a shock of anger through me. I'd built my company from nothing, sleeping on a friend's couch in San Francisco, applying to every tech firm until I landed my first coding job. Yet he claimed credit, as if my life were a footnote to his legacy. I retreated to the hallway, my hands trembling as I gripped my satchel. Nathan intercepted me near the staircase, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Abby." A word. He guided me to a quiet corner by the French doors, his eyes narrowing. "I heard you've been asking Mom about her college days. What are you digging for?" His directness startled me. After the DNA test, I'd casually asked my mother about her life before marriage, fishing for clues about the letters Daniel Harper. But I'd thought my questions subtle, just curious about her past. I said carefully. Women her age didn't get many chances to build their own paths. He studied me, his gaze eerily similar to our father's calculating. Cold. "Look, whatever you're doing with that boat and these questions, stop. The family has a balance, a structure. Don't disrupt it with some midlife crisis." His condescension mirrored our father's so perfectly, I nearly laughed. "Balance," I shot back, my voice low but sharp. "You mean a hierarchy where your wins are celebrated and mine are dismissed." He stepped closer, his voice a hiss. "Dad built everything we have. Your fancy startup, your San Francisco loft, it's all because of his foundation. Show some gratitude." Before I could respond, Rachel appeared, sensing the tension. "Everything okay?" she asked, her eyes darting between us. "Aunt Lillian's looking for you both." Dinner's about to get serious. Nathan's public smile snapped into place. The perfect son returning. "Just catching up with Abby," he said, clapping my shoulder like we were allies. "Business talk." As he walked away, Rachel touched my arm. "Your dad plays favorites like it's a blood sport," she said softly. "But what you've done on your own, it's incredible." Her words were a lifeline, but they also cracked something open inside me. The realization that others saw the dynamic I'd spent years pretending wasn't real. The dinner bell chimed again, signaling the final course. I lingered in the hallway, my fingers brushing the letter's outline in my satchel. Part of me wanted to flee, to drive back to San Francisco and leave this charade behind. But a stronger part, fueled by anger and the letter's promise of truth, refused to retreat. I straightened, steeling myself for the performance ahead, knowing the evening was building to something I couldn't yet predict. The sailboat had failed, but the letter was my last card to play, and I wasn't sure I could keep it in my hand much longer. The chandelier's light flickered across the dining room, casting shadows that danced on the walls like ghosts of the Larson family's carefully curated facade. The air was thick with the scent of rosemary and red wine, but the tension from my father's toast lingered. His words proud of my children, well, most of them still ringing in my ears. The guests had resumed their conversations, their laughter forced, as if trying to erase the awkwardness of his public jab. My mother's face remained pale, her hands twisting her napkin into knots, while Claire's eyes darted toward me, pleading for me to stay composed. Nathan, seated near our father, wore a smug satisfaction that made my stomach churn. The letter in my satchel, tucked beneath my chair, felt like a live wire. Its unopened contents, a secret I could no longer ignore. The dessert course lavender creme brulee arrived, the crack of spoons against caramelized sugar punctuating the strained chatter. I took a measured sip of coffee, my hand steady despite the storm raging inside me. My father's insult wasn't new. I'd endured years of his critiques, each one designed to diminish my achievements, my startup's $50 million valuation, my patents, my Forbes recognition into something trivial, unworthy of the Larson name. But tonight, fueled by the sailboat's failure and the letter's looming truth, his words ignited a fury I couldn't suppress. The DNA test I'd taken months ago, prompted by a genealogy app, had confirmed I wasn't his daughter. And the letter, found in my mother's attic, hinted at a past she'd buried. I'd avoided opening it, afraid of the finality it would bring. But now, as my father's voice carried on about Silicon Valley's next big venture, I felt the weight of that fear shift into resolve. I stood, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor, the sound cutting through the room like a gunshot. Every eye turned to me, conversations halting mid-sentence. My mother's face registered alarm, her eyes wide with a plea I couldn't heed. My father's gaze narrowed, his lips tightening as if sensing a challenge to his carefully controlled narrative. I smoothed my cream dress, my movements deliberate, and drew a breath, channeling the calm I'd honed in boardrooms filled with skeptical investors. "Thank you, Father, for your illuminating toast," I began, my voice clear and steady, carrying across the table. "I've spent 34 years trying to earn your approval, chasing standards that shift whenever I get close. Tonight, I finally understand why." The room was deathly silent, the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. My father's expression darkened, his hand tightening around his brandy glass. But I pressed on, my words fueled by decades of suppressed hurt. I built a company from nothing, secured patents that reshaped an industry, and became the youngest woman on Forbes 30 Under 30. By any objective measure, I'm not the little dreamer you described. But in your world, success isn't about results. It's about reflecting your glory, conforming to your vision. I paused, letting my gaze sweep the table, meeting the eyes of relatives who'd witnessed this dynamic for years. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others, like Rachel, nodded slightly, their support a quiet anchor. I reached into my satchel, my fingers brushing the letter's worn edges. The temptation to open it here, to read its contents aloud, was overwhelming. But I'd promised my friend Maya I wouldn't detonate that bomb in public. Instead, I withdrew the envelope, its cream paper stark against the dark tablecloth, and placed it precisely in the center. My movements measured. "This is for you, Dad," I said, infusing the word with a bitter irony. "Happy birthday. Maybe it'll explain why I've never been enough." The implication hung in the air, heavy and electric. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while Nathan straightened, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. My father stared at the envelope, his face a mask of controlled fury, but he didn't move to take it. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out, my heels echoing in the stunned silence. The dining room erupted into murmurs as I reached the foyer, the voices overlapping into a chaotic hum. I didn't look back. The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside, the ocean's roar a soothing counterpoint to the storm I'd unleashed. My satchel bounced against my hip, lighter now without the letter, but the weight of what I'd done pressed against my chest. I'd spent my life avoiding this kind of confrontation, always choosing diplomacy over defiance. But tonight, the truth had demanded to be heard. I drove to the marina, the coastal road blurring past as I gripped the wheel, my heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and liberation. The sailboat waited, its silhouette a dark promise against the moonlit water. I'd kept a spare key, a precaution I hadn't planned to use, but now it felt inevitable. I parked, grabbed my satchel, and boarded the schooner, my hands moving on instinct as I untied the lines and started the engine. The boat hummed to life, its gentle vibration grounding me as I guided it out of the marina and into the open bay. The act wasn't planned, it was a reclamation, a refusal to let my father claim another piece of me. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, its waves glinting under the stars. I cut the engine and let the boat drift, the silence broken only by the lapping water and my own ragged breaths. My phone buzzed relentlessly in my satchel. Claire, Nathan, my mother, even Rachel, but I ignored it, needing this moment to myself. The letter's contents, though unopened by me, were clear enough from the fragments I'd glimpsed. A confession from my mother about a college love affair with a man named Daniel Harper, an artist she'd loved before marrying my father to save face. The DNA test had confirmed I wasn't a larcen, and the letter, addressed to Daniel, seemed to hold the rest of the story: a pregnancy, a choice, a life built on a lie. As I sat on the deck, the stars above a vast map of possibilities, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For years, I'd measured my worth by my father's approval, twisting myself into shapes to fit his mold. The sailboat, a reckless attempt to buy his love, had been my final offering, and his dismissal had severed something inside me. The letter was no longer a burden, but a key, unlocking a truth I'd always sensed. I was an outsider in my own family, not because of my failures, but because of a secret my father had carried and used to justify his coldness. My phone buzzed again, Claire's name flashing on the screen. I answered this time, her voice a mix of panic and concern. Abby. What was in that envelope? Dad's losing it. He opened it in front of everyone, and Mom's locked herself in her room. Where are you? I exhaled, the ocean's rhythm steadying me. I'm safe. Claire. I'm on the boat. There was a pause, then a soft laugh. Of course you are. That's so you. Just, please tell me what's going on. I hesitated, then told her about the DNA test, the letter, the truth I'd pieced together. I'm not his daughter, Claire. He's known all along, and it's why he's never loved me. Her silence was heavy, broken only by a shaky breath. Abby, I had no idea. I knew he was harder on you. But this, God, it explains so much. What are you going to do? I looked out at the horizon, the stars reflecting on the water. I don't know yet, but I'm done chasing his approval. She promised to check on our mother and urged me to call her later, her voice a lifeline I clung to as I hung up. The boat rocked gently, and I let myself imagine a life unburdened by my father's expectations. The letter had confirmed what I'd suspected, but it also freed me from the need to prove myself to a man who'd never truly seen me. As dawn approached, I started the engine and steered back to the marina, leaving the boat docked with a note. For Edward, no returns needed. It was a final gesture, not of defeat, but of release. I drove to a hotel in Carmel, the weight of the night settling into my bones. But for the first time in years, I felt the possibility of a future shaped by my own terms, not his. The Carmel hotel room was a quiet sanctuary, its muted beige walls and soft lighting a stark contrast to the chaos I'd left behind at the Larson estate. I sat on the edge of the bed, my satchel discarded on the floor. The absence of the letter, a strange relief after carrying its weight for months. The ocean's distant roar filtered through the open window, a reminder of the sailboat I docked at the marina with a note for my father. For Edward, no returns needed. That act, impulsive and defiant, had been my final severance from the desperate hope of earning his love. But as the adrenaline of last night faded, the reality of what I'd done, placing the letter on the dining room table, exposing a secret that could unravel. My family settled into my bones like a cold fog. My phone, silenced but glowing with notifications, told the story of the fallout. 17 missed calls, 32 texts, a digital explosion mirroring the chaos I'd triggered. Claire's messages were a mix of concern and urgency. Abby. Dad read the letter aloud. Mom's a wreck. Where are you? Nathan's were colder, more predictable. Return the boat immediately. Abigail. And retract your stunt with that letter, or will pursue legal action. My mother's voicemails began composed but unraveled into raw emotion. Abigail, please call. The letter, it's not what you think. We need to talk. I hadn't responded, not yet ready to face the questions piling up like driftwood on a storm-swept shore. The letter, though I hadn't read it fully, had revealed enough through its translucent envelope to confirm what the DNA test had suggested. I wasn't Edward Larson's daughter, found in my mother's attic 3 months ago, tucked inside a photo album. It was addressed to a Daniel Harper in her elegant script, its opening lines hinting at a college love affair, a pregnancy, and a marriage to my father to preserve her family's reputation. The DNA test, taken on a whim after a genealogy app flagged inconsistencies, had shown no genetic link to Edward, and the letter seemed to hold the rest of the story, a truth he'd known and used to justify his lifelong coldness toward me. I showered, the hot water washing away the salt and exhaustion of my night on the sailboat, and changed into jeans and a sweater from the overnight bag I'd packed as a precaution. The mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized, eyes shadowed but resolute. No longer the daughter twisting herself into shapes to please a man who couldn't love her. My phone rang again, Claire's name flashing. And this time, I answered, needing a tether to the world I'd shattered. Abby, thank God, she said, her voice hushed, as if speaking from a hidden corner of the estate. Are you okay? Where are you? I'm in Carmel, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm safe. What's happening there? She exhaled heavily, the sound carrying the weight of the night's wreckage. It's a mess. After you left, Dad opened the letter right there at the table, read it for maybe a minute, then started shouting for Mom. She took one look at it and went white, like she'd seen a ghost. They locked themselves in his study for a bit, while everyone just sat there, stunned. Then Dad stormed out, saw the boat was gone, and lost it completely. I've never seen him like that. Abby screaming, pacing, calling you names I won't repeat. I closed my eyes, picturing the dining room's polished facade crumbling. And Mom? I asked, dreading the answer. She's locked herself in their bedroom. Won't talk to anyone. Not even Nathan. The guests left pretty fast after that, like rats off a sinking ship. Dad's been on the phone in his study, probably with his lawyer, and Nathan's ranting about suing you over the boat, which is insane given everything else. She paused, her voice softening. Abby, is it true? The letter, the test. What you said about not being his daughter. I leaned against the window, the ocean's gray expanse stretching below. It's true, I said, the words making the truth viscerally real. The DNA test showed no link to him. The letter, it's from Mom to someone named Daniel Harper, about a pregnancy before she married Dad. I think he's my biological father. Saying it aloud to Claire, the sister who'd always been my ally, cracked something open inside me, a mix of relief and grief. Did you know anything? I asked, almost afraid of her answer. No, she said firmly. I knew he was harder on you, always comparing you to Nathan or me, but I thought it was just his way of pushing you. It explains so much. The way he'd look at you sometimes, like you were a puzzle he couldn't solve. Her voice broke, and I realized she was crying. I'm so sorry, Abby. I should have stood up for you more. Her apology, raw and unprompted, lodged in my chest, a balm for wounds I'd carried too long. It's not your fault, I said, meaning it, but I need to know more. I'm meeting Mom tomorrow. I have to hear it from her. Claire promised to keep me updated and urged me to stay safe. Her voice a lifeline as we hung up. I moved to the hotel's small desk, opening my laptop to distract myself with work emails. But my mind kept drifting to the letter's implications. Who was Daniel Harper? A college fling, a lost love, a man my mother had chosen to erase from her life. And why had my father agreed to raise me, only to punish me for existing? The next morning, I met my mother at a quiet cafe in Carmel, its wooden tables overlooking a garden of wildflowers. She arrived looking older than I'd ever seen her, her elegant poise replaced by a vulnerability that made her seem almost human. Not the untouchable matriarch of the Larson family. Her hands trembled as she stirred her coffee, her eyes avoiding mine. "Abigail," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for you to find out this way. Tell me the truth," I said, my tone firm but not unkind. "Who's Daniel Harper? And why did you marry Dad if you were pregnant with another man's child?" She flinched, as if the question were a physical blow, but she nodded, her gaze finally meeting mine. "His name was Daniel Harper," she said, her voice steadying. "We met my junior year at Berkeley, at an art gallery event. He was a painter, studying at the San Francisco Art Institute. Brilliant, passionate, completely wrong for a girl from my family's world. My parents wanted a match that would secure my future, not a dreamer with paint on his hands." Her story unfolded like a faded photograph coming into focus. She and Daniel had fallen in love, their romance a secret from her conservative family. When they discovered it, they forbade her from seeing him, threatening to cut her off. 2 months later, she met my father at a charity gala, the appropriate match her parents approved. When she realized she was pregnant with Daniel's child, her world collapsed. "I told Daniel I was ending things," she said, her eyes distant. "I couldn't bear to tell him about you. My parents arranged for me to marry Edward. He knew I was pregnant, but he offered to raise you as his own, partly because he loved me, partly because my family's connections would help his business." I listened, my coffee untouched. As she described the early years of their marriage, my father had promised to treat me as his daughter, but my resemblance to Daniel, my hazel eyes, my curiosity, my refusal to accept things at face value became a constant reminder of her past. "Every time he looked at you," she said, tears brimming, "he saw another man's child. He tried, Abigail, but he couldn't separate his feelings from the truth. I thought if I kept the secret, we could be a family. I was wrong." The question I'd been holding back spilled out, raw and unfiltered. "Why didn't you protect me? You saw how he treated me, every achievement undermined, every milestone dismissed. How could you let that go on for 34 years? Her face crumpled, a grief so raw it momentarily overrode my anger. "I failed you," she admitted. No excuses offered. "I told myself you were strong, that you'd build a life beyond his approval. I was afraid of what the truth would do to you, to Nathan, to Claire. Each time I considered telling you, the moment felt wrong, the lie too big to undo. I was a coward." Her confession hung between us, heavy with regret. I wanted to hate her, to blame her for the years of pain, but I saw the young woman she'd been trapped by her family's expectations, forced to bury her love for Daniel to secure a future for me. "What happened to him?" I asked, my voice softer now. "Daniel. I mean," she hesitated, then said, "He moved to Seattle after college, built a career as a painter. He's married now, with 3 children. I followed his life through art magazines, but I never contacted him. I promised Edward the past would stay buried." The cafe's hum faded as I processed her words. Daniel Harper, my biological father, was out there, living a life I'd never known, with a family who were my half-siblings. The realization was both grounding and disorienting, like finding a missing piece of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. "Does he know about me?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, I couldn't bring myself to tell him. It was part of the deal with Edward to protect you, to give you his name. We sat in silence, the weight of her story settling between us. There was no neat resolution, only the beginning of a truth we'd both have to navigate. As we parted, she touched my hand, her grip fragile but firm. I love you, Abigail. I always have, even if I failed to show it. Can we talk again? I nodded, unable to promise more, and drove back to the hotel. My mind a tangle of emotions, anger, grief, and a strange, tentative hope. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and searched for Daniel Harper. His website was sleek, showcasing vibrant paintings of coastal landscapes. His bio mentioning his Seattle gallery and family. On impulse, I sent an email introducing myself as a tech entrepreneur interested in his work, hinting at a personal connection I wasn't ready to name. It was a small step, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a piece my father had tried to erase. The Carmel sun rose with a quiet insistence, its light filtering through the hotel room's gauzy curtains and painting the walls in shades of gold. I sat at the small desk, my laptop open to Daniel Harper's gallery website. His vibrant coastal paintings a mirror to the Monterey seascape beyond my window. The email I'd sent yesterday, a cautious introduction hinting at a personal connection, felt like a stone dropped into a still pond, its ripples still unknown. After the chaos of the reunion dinner, the sailboat's reclamation, and my mother's tearful confession about my origins, I was adrift, grappling with a truth that had rewritten my past. I wasn't Edward Larson's daughter. The DNA test and the letter to Daniel, my biological father, had confirmed it. And now, in the quiet of this hotel room, I was beginning to navigate what that meant for my future. My phone, still heavy with unread messages, buzzed with a new text from Claire. Dad's calmed down, but he's meeting with his lawyer today. Nathan's pushing for some kind of action over the boat. Mom wants to see you again. Call me. I sighed, rubbing my temples. The fallout from placing the letter on the dining room table was still unfolding. A storm I'd ignited but couldn't control. Nathan's threats of legal action over the sailboat were predictable. His loyalty to our father as unshakable as ever. But they felt petty against the larger truth I'd uncovered. My mother's request for another meeting tugged at me, her raw honesty at the cafe yesterday lingering like a half-healed wound. I typed a quick reply to Claire. I'm okay. In Carmel. We'll call soon. Thanks for being there. I needed her steadiness. But I wasn't ready to dive back into the family's chaos, not yet. Instead, I ordered coffee from room service and pulled up my work emails, hoping routine would anchor me. My startup's latest funding round had closed, and my team was buzzing with plans for international expansion. But even those victories felt distant, overshadowed by the personal earthquake I'd triggered. As I skimmed a report, my laptop pinged with a new email, the sender's name stopping my breath. Daniel Harper. My pulse quickened as I opened it. His words formal but warm. Dear Abigail, thank you for your interest in my work. Your message intrigued me. Your company sounds fascinating, and I'd love to hear more about this personal connection. I'll be in San Francisco next week for an exhibition. Could we meet? Regards, Daniel. The invitation was cautious, like a door cracked open, and I stared at it, torn between excitement and fear. Meeting him would make the abstract real, a step toward a father I'd never known. I spent the morning drafting a reply, settling on a tone that was professional yet open. Dear Daniel, I'd be delighted to meet in San Francisco. Your paintings resonate with me, and I'm eager to share more about our connection. Please let me know a convenient time. I hit send, my heart pounding, then closed my laptop, needing to move. To think, I walked to the beach, the sand cool beneath my sneakers, the ocean's rhythm a steady counterpoint to my racing thoughts. The sailboat was back at the marina, no longer mine, but a symbol of the freedom I'd claimed by sailing it into the night. That act, born of anger and defiance, had shifted something inside me, a realization that my worth didn't depend on my father's approval or lack thereof. By noon, I drove to a nearby park, its cypress trees casting dappled shadows on the grass. I called Claire, needing her perspective before facing my mother again. "Abby, you sound lighter," she said, her relief palpable. "What's going on?" I told her about Daniel's email, the possibility of meeting him, and she listened without interrupting, her silence a gift. "That's huge," she said finally. "Are you ready for it?" I mean, after everything with Dad and Mom, I admitted I wasn't sure, but the idea of knowing Daniel, even as a stranger, felt like a chance to reclaim a piece of myself. "He's an artist," I said, almost to myself. Maybe that's where I get my need to create, to build something from nothing. Claire laughed softly. "You've always been different, Abby. Not in a bad way, just you see the world through a lens Nathan and I never could. If this Daniel guy is part of that, you owe it to yourself to find out." She updated me on the estate. My father had retreated to his study, issuing orders through Nathan, who was fixated on the boat as a point of pride. My mother was quieter, spending hours in her garden, but had asked Claire to arrange another meeting with me. "She's carrying a lot of guilt," Claire said. "I think she wants to make things right, or at least try." That afternoon, I agreed to meet my mother at her favorite tea house in Monterey, a quaint spot with lace curtains and porcelain cups that felt like an extension of her curated world. She arrived in a simple linen dress, her usual elegance subdued, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. "Abigail, thank you for coming," she said, her voice fragile but resolute. We ordered tea, the ritual a small comfort, and she began without preamble. "I've been thinking about what you asked, why I didn't protect you from Edward's coldness. I want to be honest, even if it's painful." She spoke of the early years, how my father's initial willingness to raise me had soured as I grew. My traits, my hazel eyes, my stubborn curiosity echoing Daniel's in ways that unsettled him. "He saw you as a reminder of my betrayal," she said, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I thought time would soften him, that he'd see your brilliance, your strength. But he built a wall, and I let it stand, convincing myself you were resilient enough to handle it. I was wrong, and I'll carry that regret forever." Her honesty was raw, no excuses offered, and it stirred a complex mix of anger and empathy in me. I saw the young woman she'd been, trapped by societal pressures, but I also saw the mother who'd chosen silence over advocacy. "Why didn't you leave him?" I asked, the question sharper than I intended. She sighed, her gaze drifting to the window. "I thought I was protecting you all, Nathan." "Claire, Edward provided stability, opportunities. Leaving would have meant tearing apart the family, exposing the lie to everyone. I told myself it was enough to love you quietly, to celebrate your successes in my heart. But I see now how much that cost you." Her voice broke, and she reached for my hand, her touch tentative. "Can you forgive me, Abigail?" "Not today, but someday." I didn't answer immediately, the weight of her question too heavy to lift. "I need time," I said finally, my voice soft but firm. "But I want to try. Mom, I want us to be honest with each other." She nodded, tears spilling, and we sat in silence, the tea growing cold. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a start, a crack in the wall we'd both built. 2 days later, Daniel Harper replied, suggesting a meeting at a San Francisco cafe near his exhibition. I drove up the coast, the familiar highway a backdrop to my swirling thoughts. The cafe was cozy, its walls lined with local art, and Daniel was already there, his presence unmistakable, tall, with salt and pepper hair and hazel eyes that mirrored mine. He stood as I approached, his smile cautious but warm. "Abigail," he said, extending a hand. "You look familiar." Somehow. We ordered coffee, the small talk about his paintings and my startup a safe bridge to the deeper conversation. Finally, I took a breath and said, "Daniel, I didn't reach out just about your art. I think I'm your daughter." His face froze, a mix of shock and dawning recognition. I explained the DNA test, the letter, my mother's confession. Watching his expression shift from disbelief to a quiet intensity. "Lillian," he murmured, almost to himself. "I never knew. She ended things so suddenly, said her family wouldn't approve. I thought it was just class differences." He told me his story moving to Seattle, building a career, marrying a musician named Sarah, raising 3 children. The pain of losing my mother had faded. But my revelation reopened old wounds. "You have her intensity," he said, studying me, "and her way of tilting your head when you think. If you're my daughter, Abigail, I want to know you, not as an obligation, but because you're here, and that means something." His words were careful, but they carried a sincerity that felt like a lifeline. We talked for hours, not as father and daughter, but as 2 people discovering shared passions, art, innovation, the thrill of creating something new. He showed me photos of his family, my half-siblings, and invited me to visit his gallery in Seattle. As we parted, he hugged me, a brief but genuine gesture. "This is a lot," he said, his voice thick, "but I'm glad you found me." I drove back to Carmel, the weight of the meeting settling into a tentative hope, a sense that I could build something new, unburdened by the Larson legacy. The Monterey coastline stretched before me, its waves a restless pulse against the cliffs. As I drove back to Carmel after my meeting with Daniel Harper in San Francisco, the memory of his hazel eyes mine, but older, etched with a life I was only beginning to understand, lingered like a melody I couldn't shake. Our conversation, cautious but genuine, had opened a door to a part of myself I'd never known, a connection untainted by the Larson family's expectations. Yet, the weight of the reunion's fallout clung to me, a reminder that freedom from my father's shadow came with a cost. The letter I'd placed on the dining room table had shattered the family's facade, and while I'd reclaimed the sailboat and my truth, the ripples of that night were still crashing against the shore. Back at the hotel, I checked my phone, the screen a mosaic of missed calls and texts. Claire's messages were a steady drumbeat of support. "Mom's been gardening all day. Says she's ready to talk whenever you are. Nathan's still on his lawyer kick, but Dad's gone quiet. Call me." My mother's voicemails were tentative, each one a step toward reconciliation. "Abigail, I found an old sketchbook of yours from high school. I'd love to give it to you. Can we meet?" Nathan's texts, predictably hostile, centered on the sailboat. "You think you can just take Dad's gift and walk away? Expect a formal demand by end of week." His obsession with the boat, a symbol of my defiance, felt like a distraction from the larger truth that I wasn't his biological sister, a fact the letter had exposed. I ignored Nathan's threats, knowing legal action over the boat was a hollow gesture. I'd returned it to the marina, my note to my father a clear end to that chapter. Instead, I called Claire, needing her clarity to navigate the next steps. "Abby, you sound different," she said, her voice warm despite the strain of the past days. "How was San Francisco?" I told her about Daniel, the cafe, the strange comfort of seeing my own features in a stranger's face. He's not trying to be my dad, I said, leaning against the hotel window, the ocean gray under a cloudy sky. But he wants to know me, and that feels possible. Claire's laugh was soft, a sound that grounded me. You deserve that, Abby. Someone who sees you for you, not as a larcen or a disappointment. She updated me on the estate's tense atmosphere. My father had retreated into silence, a rare state that unnerved even Nathan, who was pushing for control in his absence. My mother, meanwhile, was reaching out through small gestures, gardening, sorting old family photos, leaving voicemails that hinted at a desire to rebuild. She's different since you left that letter, Claire said, like she's waking up from a long sleep. But Nathan's digging in, acting like you've betrayed the family legacy. Be careful. Okay. Her warning echoed my own unease. Nathan's loyalty to our father had always been absolute, and my actions had challenged the hierarchy he thrived in. Determined to move forward, I booked a therapy session with a counselor in San Francisco, recommended by my friend Maya. The decision felt urgent, a need to untangle the threads of my identity after decades of chasing my father's approval. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Elena Ruiz with a calm presence, listened as I recounted the reunion, the sailboat, the letter, and my meeting with Daniel. You've spent your life performing for a man who couldn't see you, she said, her voice gentle but incisive. That need for validation, it's a survival mechanism. But it's not who you are. What happens when you let go of that script? Her question lingered as I drove back to Carmel, the coastal highway, a familiar companion. Letting go meant dismantling the version of myself I'd built to please my father, the overachiever, the entrepreneur who worked 80-hour weeks to prove her worth. It meant embracing the Abigail who'd sailed into the night, who'd emailed a stranger who might be her father, who'd stood up at that dinner and spoken her truth. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying, like stepping off a cliff with no guarantee of a soft landing. A few days later, I met my mother again, this time at a cliffside lookout near the estate, a place we'd walked when I was a child, collecting shells and laughing over nothing. She arrived with a canvas tote, her face softer than at the tea house, her hands clutching a small, worn sketchbook. You drew these when you were 16, she said, handing it to me. I kept them, even when Edward said they were a waste of time. The pages were filled with my teenage sketches. Ocean waves, tech prototypes, abstract shapes that hinted at the innovator I'd become. The gesture, simple but deliberate, cracked open a warmth I hadn't expected. We walked along the cliff path, the wind tugging at our hair, and she spoke with a candor that felt new. I've been reading about Daniel's work, she admitted, her voice steady. His paintings, they're exactly what I loved about him, bold, unapologetic. I see that in you, Abigail, and I should have nurtured it, not let Edward's resentment overshadow it. Her acknowledgement of my father's role in our strained relationship was a step beyond her earlier apologies, a recognition of the dynamic she'd enabled. I asked about her own dreams, the art curator she'd been before becoming the Larson matriarch, and she smiled wistfully. I loved curating, finding beauty in chaos. Maybe I'll go back to it, in some small way. It's not too late, is it? Her question, vulnerable and hopeful, mirrored my own search for a new beginning. It's not, I said, squeezing her hand. For either of us, we didn't erase the past, but we began to build something new, a relationship rooted in honesty rather than silence. As we parted, she hugged me, her embrace fierce, and promised to call soon. Driving back, I felt a shift, a sense that we could become allies, not just mother and daughter bound by obligation. The next week brought a new challenge, a letter from my father's lawyer, a formal demand for the sailboat's return or compensation for its unauthorized use. The language was cold, legalistic, but I recognized Nathan's influence, his need to reassert control after the letter's revelation. I consulted a lawyer friend who laughed at the claim. "You gifted it, then returned it. They've got nothing," she said. "But this is about power, not the boat." I instructed her to draft a response declining any liability. A small but satisfying act of resistance, Claire invited me to her home in Monterey for dinner, a cozy craftsman bungalow filled with her children's toys and David's cooking. Over homemade lasagna, we talked openly about the family's fracture. "Nathan's acting like you've declared war," she said, rolling her eyes. "But Dad's silence is what worries me. He's never this quiet. It's like he's planning something." David, a high school teacher with a knack for cutting through drama, chimed in. "Your dad's trapped in his own narrative. Abby, you challenged that, and he can't handle it. Keep doing you, that's the best revenge." Their warmth, unburdened by the Larson legacy, reminded me of what family could be. Claire and I stayed up late, sipping wine and reminiscing about childhood moments, sneaking cookies, building sandcastles memories untouched by our father's shadow. "You're my sister, Abby," she said, her eyes fierce. "Blood or not, that doesn't change. I've got your back." Her words, simple but unwavering, became a cornerstone for the life I was rebuilding. A surprise came midweek, an email from Daniel, attaching photos from his San Francisco exhibition and inviting me to visit his Seattle gallery. "My kids are curious about you," he wrote, a hint of humor in his tone. No pressure, but they'd love to meet their maybe sister. The idea of half-siblings, a family I'd never imagined, was daunting but thrilling. I replied, accepting the invitation for next month, and began researching flights, my heart lighter at the prospect of connection. As I settled into my work routine, my startup thriving with new clients, I noticed a change in myself. Meetings felt less like performances, my decisions driven by passion rather than a need to prove something. Therapy with Dr. Ruiz helped me name the patterns I'd carried: perfectionism, fear of rejection, and begin to let them go. One session, she asked, "What does Abigail want? Not as a daughter or a CEO, but as a person." The question stumped me, but it also sparked a curiosity about my own desires, a journey I was only beginning to explore. Driving along the coast one evening, the sunset painting the ocean in hues of pink and gold, I realized I was no longer the girl who'd bought a sailboat to win her father's love. The letter, once a grenade, was now a map, guiding me toward a life shaped by my choices. My mother's honesty, Claire's loyalty, Daniel's openness, they were the family I was choosing, not the one I'd been born into. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I felt ready to navigate it, not as a Larson, but as Abigail, whole and enough. The Monterey Cliffs stood sentinel against the Pacific, their rugged edges softened by the morning mist as I walked the familiar path near the Larson estate. It had been 3 weeks since the reunion dinner, since I'd placed the letter on the table and sailed the schooner into the night, reclaiming a piece of myself from my father's dismissive grasp. The ocean's steady rhythm mirrored the calm I'd begun to find, a quiet strength forged through therapy, honest conversations with my mother, and the tentative connection with Daniel Harper, my biological father. Yet, the family's fracture lingered, a fault line that trembled with every text from Nathan or my father's ominous silence. Today, as I prepared to return to San Francisco, I felt the weight of that fracture shift, a final reckoning looming like the storm clouds gathering offshore. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Claire's name lighting up the screen. "Abby, you need to know something," she said, her voice low. "Urgent. Nathan's been digging into your startup, talking to investors, spreading rumors about your leadership. I overheard him on the phone with one of Dad's associates. They're trying to undermine you, maybe force a buyout." Her words hit like a cold wave, stirring the anger I'd worked to temper. Nathan's threats over the sailboat had been petty, but this was calculated. A strike at the company I'd built from nothing. The one achievement my father couldn't claim. "Why now?" I asked, gripping the phone. Claire sighed. "You challenged Dad's narrative, exposed the lie he's lived with for decades. Nathan's protecting the Larson brand, or what's left of it." I thanked her, promising to call later, and stood staring at the ocean, the wind tugging at my scarf. My startup, valued at $50 million, was my lifeline, a testament to my resilience against my father's dismissal. The idea of Nathan and my father conspiring to dismantle it wasn't just personal, it was a declaration of war. I drove to my hotel in Carmel, my mind racing, and called my lawyer friend, Sarah, who'd handled the sailboat dispute. "They're playing dirty," she said after I explained Claire's warning. "But your company's solid, strong board. Loyal investors. We can counter this with a defamation claim if they push too far." Want me to dig into Nathan's moves? I agreed, authorizing her to investigate. A decision that felt like arming myself for a battle I hadn't chosen. The next morning, I met my mother for breakfast at a Monterey bakery. Its warm scent of croissants, a small comfort against the storm brewing inside me. She arrived with a folder of old photos, her latest gesture of reconciliation, and we sat by a window overlooking the marina where the sailboat had once docked. "These are from your childhood," she said, sliding the folder toward me. "I thought you'd like to have them." The photos captured moments I'd forgotten. Me building sandcastles with Claire, laughing with my mother at a county fair, moments untouched by my father's coldness. Her effort to rebuild our bond was palpable, and I felt a softening, a willingness to meet her halfway. We talked about her plans to volunteer at a local art gallery, a step toward reclaiming the curator she'd been. "I'm learning to be Lillian again," she said, her smile tentative but real. "And I want to be a mother you can trust." "Abigail." I nodded, sharing my own progress therapy. My meeting with Daniel. The Seattle trip I'd planned to meet his family. But Claire's warning hung over me. And I decided to be honest. "Mom, Claire says Nathan's targeting my company. With Dad's backing. Do you know anything about it?" Her face fell, a mix of guilt and resignation. "I suspected Nathan was up to something," she admitted. "Edward's been distant, but I overheard him talking to his lawyer about protecting the family legacy." "I didn't realize it was about your business." Her candor, though painful, strengthened the fragile trust we were building. "I'll talk to him," she promised. "He's hurt." Abigail. In his own way. The letter, it forced him to face a truth he's buried for 34 years. But that's no excuse for this. I thanked her, unsure if she could sway my father, but grateful for her willingness to try. As we parted, she hugged me, her embrace fiercer than before. And I drove back to the hotel, the photos in my passenger seat a reminder of a mother I was learning to know. That afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at my hotel. Nathan. He stood in the lobby, his tailored suit immaculate, his expression a mix of arrogance and unease. "We need to talk," he said, his voice clipped. I led him to the hotel's quiet courtyard, my guard up, Sarah's warning about his tactics echoing in my mind. "What's this about?" "Nathan," I asked, crossing my arms. He didn't sit, pacing instead, his hands in his pockets. You've gone too far. Abby. That stunt with the letter. Taking the boat, it's not just about you and Dad. You've embarrassed the family. Part of like you've damaged our reputation. And now I hear you're meeting some artist, claiming he's your real dad. It's a slap in the face. His words dripped with the same entitlement I'd heard from our fathers, but they also betrayed a crack in his armor, a fear of losing the Larson legacy he'd been groomed to inherit. The letter was the truth. I said, my voice steady. I'm not a Larson. Nathan. And Dad's known that since before I was born. If anyone's damaged the family, it's him. For punishing me for a lie he chose to live. I stepped closer, meeting his gaze and my company. If you're spreading rumors to investors, you're not just hurting me, you're risking your own reputation. My board's already looking into it. He flinched, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. But he recovered quickly. You think you're untouchable because you've got a few headlines. He snapped. Dad built the world you're playing in. Without him, you'd be nothing. The accusation stung, but it also clarified something. Nathan's loyalty to our father was less about love and more about dependence. A need to preserve the hierarchy that elevated him. I built my company without him. I said, my voice low but firm. And I'll protect it. Nathan, back off, or you'll regret it. He stared at me, his jaw tight, then turned and left without another word. His exit, a silent acknowledgement that I wasn't the pushover he'd expected. The confrontation left me shaken but resolute. I called Sarah, updating her on Nathan's visit, and she promised to escalate our response, contacting my investors to counter any rumors. Claire texted later, stunned by Nathan's audacity, but proud of my stand. You're a force. Abby, she wrote. He didn't see that coming. Her support, coupled with my mother's evolving honesty, anchored me as I prepared for the Seattle trip. A month later, I flew to Seattle, my heart a mix of anticipation and nerves. Daniel met me at his gallery, a sunlit space filled with his paintings. Their bold colors a reflection of the passion my mother had described. His wife, Sarah, and their 3 children Lila, 17, Ethan, 15, and Mia, 12 greeted me with cautious warmth, their curiosity tempered by the strangeness of meeting a potential sister. Over dinner at their cozy craftsman home, we talked about art, tech, and family, the conversation flowing easier than I'd expected. Lila, an aspiring filmmaker, grilled me about my startup, while Ethan showed me his sketchbook, his drawings echoing Daniel's style. Mia, shy but observant, asked, "Do you like the ocean? Dad says you sailed a boat by yourself." I laughed, sharing the story, and felt a connection take root, fragile but real. Daniel and I walked along Puget Sound the next day, the water a different shade of blue from Monterey's. "You're not obligated to be part of this family," he said, his voice thoughtful, "but you're welcome here, Abigail, as much or as little as you want." His openness, free of demands, was a stark contrast to my father's conditional approval, and it gave me permission to define our relationship on my terms. I returned to San Francisco with photos, phone numbers, and a promise to visit again. The seeds of a new family taking hold. Back home, my startup weathered Nathan's sabotage, my board's swift action, and Sarah's legal maneuvering neutralizing his efforts. My father remained silent, his absence from my life a relief rather than a wound. My mother called weekly, sharing updates about her gallery work, our conversations growing warmer, more honest. Claire and I planned a Thanksgiving at her house, a new tradition free of the Larson estate's shadow. No patriarchs allowed, she joked. And I laughed, feeling the weight of the past lift. As I stood on my apartment's balcony, the San Francisco skyline glittering below, I realized the letter had been more than a revelation. It had been a liberation. My value wasn't tied to my father's name or his approval, but to the life I'd built, the people I'd chosen: Claire, my mother; Daniel, his family; the sailboat, sold by my father's lawyer; funded a scholarship for women in tech, a legacy of my own making. The horizon ahead was mine to shape, and for the first time, I was ready to sail it, not as a Larson, but as Abigail, whole and free.